Thank you, Sir Mao, for that brief introduction. Good afternoon to our attendees this afternoon. I hope you guys are still alive and get some coffee. If I know you
We
guys have
still
had a
have
long day.
230 plus participants, so yes, they
I
are
see.
waiting for you. We go ahead.
Thank you, Sir Mao. I always remember this snippet from one of my colleagues that the hardest presentation or the hardest speaking slot is the one either before the raffle or before the end of the session. So I hope you guys are still awake. Again, my name is Awi Sindiong. I'm a systems engineer from Nutanix, and I'll be sharing to you guys how to build a bulletproof business continuity strategy. So let me just share my screen real quick here. All right. Now, I know you guys have had a long day, and there have been a lot of speakers, and probably in your day-to-day work or in your day-to-day webinars that you attend or meetings that you attend at times, you see that vendors or companies would always talk to you and tell you about their capabilities and their features. Like our company, Miss or Mr. or Miss Customer can do this, can do that, but they don't really actually tell you how. But I guess the more important question here is that how do you do business continuity or disaster recovery in a very easy and simple manner? And I think I want to align that in Nutanix's mantra of making it really simple and easy for our customers to use. This afternoon, throughout this presentation that I'm about to share to you, I have 4 steps for you. Actually, five. I have a step zero, a pre-step. But actually, these 4 major steps make it really easy for Nutanix customers to design, strategize, and build their business continuity strategy. So let's get to it. All right. Let's start with step zero. Step zero is actually knowing the why and the how of business continuity in your organization. Of course, we all know that at this day and age, especially when organizations are relying heavily on IT teams, the IT teams also have more pressure to deliver 24 by 7 operations, right? And so the main reason, the why and the how, is now setting the foundation for the entire organization. If I were to summarize it in in 3 key items for the reasons why businesses need or businesses are looking into disaster recovery and business continuity, it will be number one, regulatory compliance. Number two, protection to ransomware attacks or any attack for that matter. And three, allowing business continuity, allowing the organization to continue providing the services for your customers, regardless if they are inside the organization or outside the organization. Now, the second item here, business sector. So, who needs them? Of course, everybody. Every business nowadays looks to IT to deliver that performance, looks to IT to deliver that services, regardless of when and where our customers are. And then last is how. How do organizations want to deliver this business continuity strategy? It can be inside the same data center if you guys have your own data center. It can be in the same region if you have your own data center or have a public cloud account, or it can be in a different region altogether. Maybe some of you have data centers here in the Philippines, maybe to some other cities here in the Philippines, maybe to some other countries here in the ASEAN region. Now, some of you may also be just looking into one type, maybe just same data center type of data resiliency or business continuity, while others, for other organizations, your organization will be required to have multiple sites. And so we'll go through how to easily and simply do this. All right. So that's step zero, knowing why and knowing how to do it. So, of course, since you guys are here in this summit by VSTECS, you're now filling in the checklist, your own checklist in your organization of how to do or how to improve your business continuity strategies in your organization. Let's move forward with step one. Okay. Step one is knowing your requirements. As I've mentioned, for very specific reasons, you will or you have already set business continuity strategies in place. But knowing your requirements adds a different or another layer of dimension to it. From the Nutanix's point of view, there's actually two ways on how we segregate customers or users' requirements, right? On the left, you're seeing local resiliency, right? So when we talk about local resiliency, we take a look at the hardware, the nodes and the servers, the data resiliency, and the VM level redundancy, right? So when we talk about hardware resiliency, we take a look at the different key components, right? Is the server redundant? Are the components inside the server redundant? The power supplies, the memories, the CPUs, the fans, etc., etc. And we also take a look at from a software point of view, does this software allow self-healing so that my disks, my servers can self-heal whenever a certain component fails, right? So that's for local resiliency under the hardware magnifying glass. Now for nodes, we take a look at nodes and their rack placements. Of course, in a data center these days, you'll have a separate power for the left portion of your rack space, and then for the right side of your rack, you'll have a different power provider or a different power connection. That is also in line with this local resiliency when we take a look at the node. All right. So from the Nutanix's point of view, there's also what we call node resiliency and rack awareness, such that if a certain rack goes down, you're assured that you still have a portion of your data on a different rack that allows you to rebuild your data, right? Of course, also under that node resiliency is non-disruptive upgrades. What do I mean by non-disruptive upgrades? When you, from the hardware point of view, when you want to upgrade a certain portion of your hardware or your server, you take a look at which ones or which components do I upgrade first. Do I upgrade first the BIOS? Do I upgrade next the BMC or baseboard management controller? Do I upgrade the disk firmware, etc., etc.? And sometimes these components also have their own dependencies, right? So from the Nutanix's point of view, what we incorporated in this node resiliency is that the cluster allows you to upgrade your system non-disruptively, and this will also upgrade the different components as firmware for you depending on their chronological order or dependencies. Right now, more details on that when we talk to you on a separate session, but essentially Nutanix will automate this for you. Now when we take a look at data or the resiliency on the data level, Nutanix offers tunable redundancy. To get a little bit more deeper, Nutanix allows customers to have RF2 or RFT. That's basically RF2 means you have two copies of your data spread across the entire cluster, or three copies of your data spread across the entire cluster. Now, Nutanix does not have an idea of RAID, right? So we don't stripe or distribute your data across different disks and then rebuild them before for every read or write that your systems will take or will make. Now, when you have two copies of your data, for example, for RF2, you're assured that in the entire cluster, there's one copy of your data on where that virtual machine resides, and there's another copy on a separate node or a separate server, such that if the main node where your virtual machine is running on uh, fails or is down, your system will still run through the other nodes. And that's how we do the rebuild process in the Nutanix cluster. Now, there's also, allow me to mention also that there's transparent consistency checks in the Nutanix platform. So without any user intervention, right? These consistency checks are running in the background and are run automatically for you. And you are notified if some of these checks will fail. Right? Next is on the VM level. Now, on the VM level, you have different options in terms of VM level protection. Now, you have your snapshots, your traditional snapshots, and your clones, and you can also integrate that with your third party backup providers that you have in your organization. Now we go to the next segment of resiliency from the Nutanix point of view. There's this geographical resiliency. So for other or for some organizations, you're not just looking for resiliency within your cluster. You're also looking at resiliency on components that should be outside your data center, maybe in a different city, maybe on a different region, maybe on a different country for some organizations here. Now, Nutanix offers two ways of geographical resiliency. One is site to site, different site resiliency, and next is site to cloud resiliency. Let me first talk about that site to site resiliency. Now, for site to site resiliency, we offer multi-site replication for our customers. And that includes asynchronous replication, near sync replication, synchronous, or metro. Now we'll take a little bit more detail. We'll look at it at the greater detail as we move through the presentation. Now on the second geographical resiliency category, we have the site to cloud resiliency. Now some of you may be operating 100% cloud, some of you may be operating your own data center, on-premise data center, and your own cloud infrastructure, your public cloud infrastructure. Now, Nutanix makes it very simple for customers to have and consume a hybrid cloud cluster through our user management pane, right? And that user management pane allows customers to have a single management pane for different clouds, whether it's on the private cloud, whether it's on a specific public cloud or multiple public clouds as well, right? And of course, that replication can be uh, can be fine tuned as well into asynchronous, near sync, sync, and metro availability. Now, assuming that you and your organization already know what your business continuity requirements are. And it will be a combination of local resiliency and geographical resiliency for most organizations. Now, if you know your continuity requirements, your business continuity requirements, you are also aware that there are also a lot of challenges in order to set up a business continuity strategy for any organization. Now, that's where Nutanix wants to help on, right? So just to discuss quickly some of the business continuity and disaster recovery challenges that we are experiencing today. So a lot of those are actually built on the traditional three-tier architecture. When I say three-tier architecture, you have your servers connected to fiber channel switches, and those are connected to storage controllers. Of course, at the back end of those storage controllers are disks or the actual storage themselves. Now, when for a lot of organizations, when they do business continuity or when they plan business continuity, they start to realize, or maybe some of you have already realized this, that your business continuity strategy may be too complex. Maybe there are a lot of components that are needed to be configured and optimized just so that your organization will be able to connect or will be able to have a DR site in place. Now, there's also the item on vendor and hypervisor lock-in because certain organizations have different components, have different data centers, or maybe a combination of on-prem and public cloud. There's now a disconnect between the management of the on-premises clusters and the public cloud clusters. Now, what Nutanix want to do is actually make it seamless and make this one, manage them together in a single pane of glass. Now, there's also, I need to mention this, there's also that concern always 110% of the time about expense and cost. Now, as organizations now tend to get or go into business continuity and disaster recovery, costs also are increasing, right? So you have to pay for manpower, for environmental resources, for the actual equipment themselves, etc., etc. Now, if the system is already expensive enough and there's a lot of components you need to put in to configure, now that now becomes very time consuming. There's a lot of effort needed, and chances are there are also errors inside that business continuity strategy in any organization. That's why in any organization, in a lot of times, organizations would do DR testing time and time again. But most often than not, uh, during business continuity or disaster recovery testing scenarios, teams now start to realize that it's very hard to do. What was bought initially is not that easy to use. What was bought or configured initially is not that easy to consume. And so what happens is a lot of organizations now have that hurdle, have that challenge of asking themselves, how will I be able to test my DR easily? Or how do I do this in a simple way? Because IT teams are now getting more leaner, more is expected from IT teams, more projects are expected from IT teams. And a lot of times DRs or the DR testing use cases gets put aside. Now that's what we want to bring back to the forefront and give our users that capability to do disaster recovery testing on demand. But we're getting ahead of of ourselves. Let's now head first to our step two, right? So step one is know your requirements, and with that is also knowing the challenges presented by going into disaster recovery. Now, step two would be choosing the solution that best fits the requirement. So as I've mentioned earlier, from the Nutanix point of view, there's two types of resiliency. There's that local resiliency and there's that geographical resiliency. I'm happy to share that for our prospects and for Nutanix customer, Nutanix encompasses both levels of resiliency. As you can see from this slide, uh, Nutanix has been designed for high availability from ground up. And we see that from the hardware, and we talked about self-healing and the redundancy of the different components. That goes up to the node levels where uh, the different servers are redundant to each other. That goes up to the data redundancy level where users have two copies or three copies of their data scattered across the entire cluster. And at the end of that local resiliency category is the VM level protection, where customers are able to fully use snapshots and clones, whether those snapshots or clones are application consistent or crash consistent, right? Now, for geographical resiliency, Nutanix can implement or allows customer to have a geographical resiliency design from that level of node. Okay, so from your node, you can have a geographical resiliency, right? One server is on this site, another server may be on a different site. In terms of data, when we talk about resiliency, one portion of your data may be located on site one, and then the secondary or tertiary copy of your data can be put on a different site, right? On a VM level, you can still make use of that same principles of snapshot, cloning, whether it's crash consistent or application consistent snapshots or clones, as a tool to your geographical resiliency method. Now, adding to the geographical resiliency protection methods is the site-to-site resiliency and to the cloud resiliency. Now, when we talk about site, Nutanix customers are able to have multi-site replication. That entails also metro availability and near sync. When we say near sync, that's an RPO of 15 minutes or lower. And of course, to cloud, Nutanix offers different cloud capabilities like DR to cloud, like Xi Leap. That's our DR to cloud. Xi clusters is basically running the Nutanix software, that Nutanix operating system in the public cloud using AWS. All right. And when we look at the different replication solutions, of course, for every use case, there's a specific requirement or a specific solution that's attached to that requirement. For customers looking into metro availability, that means an RPO of 0, the Nutanix hypervisor or the Nutanix running with VMware can do that for customers. For near sync, that's an RPO of 15 minutes down to 1 minute. That is also allowed. For asynchronous, which is an RPO of 1 hour or higher, that is also allowed, or that also is, customers are also enabled to do this in their Nutanix hypervisor or their VMware cluster running on top of the Nutanix cluster. There's also what we call DR orchestration with our solution called Leap. Now, DR orchestration, we'll talk about this in the next slide in greater detail, but basically this allows user to do on-demand DR testing with as simple as possible, with as less clicks as possible, with as little steps as possible. So that's what we do and offer our customers for DR orchestration. Now we also offer replication to the public cloud. There's Nutanix clusters running on AWS. That basically is the Nutanix software running as a cluster inside your AWS account or inside an AWS data center, right? So you have your Nutanix running AWS, you have your Nutanix running on your on-premise cluster, and now they can talk together because it's the same software running on these two clouds, right? In terms of Nutanix running with VMware, there's what we call Xyleap, that's DR Cloud, right? Now, Nutanix also offers cross hypervisor DR, and this is between VMware ESXi and Nutanix's own AHV hypervisor. Now, w- w- some would ask, Awi, when do we need or when does anybody look into cross hypervisor DR? This is actually for customers looking to save on cost, specifically on licensing costs on their hypervisors. So we have customers actually both locally in the Philippines and abroad who are running two different hypervisors across two different sites using the Nutanix platform. So one Nutanix platform, for example, may be running VMware, and then the disaster recovery site may be running the Acropolis hypervisor. So they saved licensing costs on their DR cluster. And with the Nutanix cluster, with the Nutanix operating system, the virtual machines running on their VMware cluster are able to replicate on their Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor cluster. And that allows them also to use a different hypervisor in DR when they want to, whenever they need to, right? Moving forward, talking more, since we touched upon DR orchestration, DR orchestration is actually done in the Nutanix user interface. We call it Prism Central. Now, I have here three major steps, right? The configuration, the reporting, and the actual operations. Now, in a nutshell, Prism Central will allow customers to have one-click failover, failback, and testing. Now, how do we do this? How does Nutanix help customers do this? Now, in Prism Central, this is our unified user interface, right? There's a wizard-based system there or view there that will ask customers in chronological order how they want their virtual machines powered up in the DR site. So, for example, you have 20 VMs running on your main site. You can create a chronological order of steps, how those VMs would power up in the DR site. I'll give you an example. For example, you have your Active Directory and your domain control and your main services. Let's say those are two VMs, two virtual machines on the Nutanix configurator inside Prism Central, you can define there that VM1 and VM2 are your basic services and they should be powered on first. Now, before you go to step 3, you can actually put there a wait time of 2 minutes. Let's say you need 2 minutes so that the services can warm up and to make sure they're up and running, right? So after 2 minutes, let's say VM3 and 4 would power up next. Now, VM3 and 4, let's say, requires you to run specific scripts in the DR site, right? So you can add a path there in the Nutanix GUI indicating to run a certain script located in a specific directory. So you now create this entire plan. We call it a recovery plan of step one, step two, step three, composed of different steps. Wait time, VM power up time, running of scripts. You can also add different steps like sending an email to you, etc., etc. So you can automate all of these tasks. Now, this recovery plan now becomes your single point of view. That recovery plan now becomes your business continuity strategy. So you see from the Nutanix GUI immediately your business continuity plan, your business continuity strategy. So every time you want to test, all you need to do is just go to that plan. There's a button there that says test. And when you click that, the Nutanix will test, create a bubble environment in your DR for you, and you can test your DR on the spot. Now, this makes it very easy for your organization to do DR testing and to assure your stakeholders that your DR is ready to accommodate any disaster and that your IT team, your organization, is ready to encounter any failure, right? And of course, it also follows that that is also the main page where you do your actual failover and failback in an actual disaster event, right? So that's disaster recovery for orchestration. Now we go to step three. Step three is talking about implementing the business continuity or disaster recovery solution that we've built through the previous steps. Now, there's a lot of ways to do it in the Nutanix. We'll go through the use cases one by one, but we won't discuss them in detail. But I'll show you how it looks like from the Nutanix point of view. The first use case is using both local and remote snapshots to replicate your data. So in a Nutanix cluster, we use snapshots, okay, lightweight snapshots, and replicate those snapshots to the secondary site. Using this system, we're able to do synchronous near sync, asynchronous near sync and synchronous replication. Now, in terms of performance, there's actually no performance impact because of redirect on write on that secondary side. This allows the Nutanix cluster to utilize the storage more efficiently. And for those customers who are using different hypervisor, you actually have less expense in terms of licensing costs on the DR side. Now, it also follows that this secondary site, I placed a note here that the second site can be an on-prem Nutanix cluster, or it can be a Nutanix cluster running on the public cloud or AWS for that matter, right? So you can have one site to one site replication, one site to many site replication, or many site to single site replication. So you have options on the topology that you want in place. Now, there's also customers who want or are looking into metro availability and synchronous replication. So these are two clusters where the RPO between them is zero. I need to mention that the network latency between these sites need to be less than 5 milliseconds. Again, the secondary site can either be an on-premise Nutanix cluster or a Nutanix cluster running on the public cloud. Now, in the event of a disaster or if the primary site goes down, there's what we call a live VM migration where your VM is automatically running on that secondary site without any user intervention for that matter, right? And again, testing and failover and failback, we go back to that DR orchestration capability of Nutanix, which you can do on demand anytime you want, whenever you want. And this is a screenshot of that in our GUI where it's configured. Okay. Now, some customers may be looking into multi-site disaster recovery, right? So how that's done, maybe in an availability zone. Let's say, for example, Metro Manila, you have one cluster in, let's say, Makati, and then let's say another cluster in Laguna, or maybe nearer one, maybe Quezon City, right? So within Metro Manila, you have two clusters running. That's the synchronization of those two clusters may be synchronous, right? Now you can mix and match the different replication topologies or solutions in your cluster. You can have a recovery zone or a different set of sites, let's say site C or site D, located maybe in different cities, maybe in Cebu or in Davao, respectively. Now, one site can have a replication that's near sync, that's 15 minutes RPO down to 1 minute, or you can also have another site, let's say site D in Davao, where you have asynchronous or near sync configuration as well. So you have the capability to mix and match. Again, that recovery availability zone can be an on-premise Nutanix cluster. It can also be a Nutanix cluster running on the public cloud. And that is very easy to manage, again, using the recovery plans page in the Nutanix Prism Central GUI, right? Some customers may be looking into robo or remote offices, branch offices. Now, these are multiple very, very small sites, and these number of small sites are replicating back to the head office. So if you are looking also into this type of setup, the Nutanix portfolio solution of business continuity can also adapt to this kind of solution as well. Now, we mentioned a few slides ago about protection against ransomware. So for Nutanix customers, it can be, again, a combination of different topologies, a combination of different Nutanix solution. You can have a primary site replicating to a DR site via sync. Now, in a ransomware attack, since RPO is zero, that DR site becomes unusable, right? So you can have another site or maybe a separate cluster where near sync is enabled or configured. Or better yet, you can have another cluster, maybe on the same site or maybe also on a different site, that's doing backup to a Nutanix cluster we call Nutanix Mine. The Nutanix Mine cluster is actually Veeam backup software or Haiku backup software running inside the Nutanix platform, right? So you can have a combination of these to protect your organization against ransomware attacks. Now, in terms of recovery, again, Nutanix is aligned with our mantra of making it easy and simple for our customers to use. So there's a button there to just click restore, and then you'll just choose what timestamp you want to restore from. And that's what our collaboration and development with VM and Haiku have done and have integrated into the Nutanix solution over the years, right? Now, the next step and the last step is actually testing your DR on demand. And I put a note here in parentheses through automation and orchestration. So we Nutanix would like customers to experience DR and to do actual DRs as simple as possible. And organizations cannot do it if there are a lot of manual tasks involved. That's why in our GUI in Prism Central, the one we discussed earlier, we incorporated recovery plans into our GUI. So that helps automate and orchestrate your DR, right? Now, in that page, you'll have one-click DR testing between sites. If you have multiple sites, you can choose which site to test to. All right. That's fully automated. You can mix and match or create multiple recovery plans. Let's say you want to define different scenarios or different strategies. You can do that. You can have as many recovery plans as you want, and then you can test them out in their own bubble network environment in the DR site whenever you want in a few clicks, right? So this keeps your applications protected. It keeps your DR site virtual machines running in a separate segregated network. So you don't have to change network IP addresses again and again, time and time again. Now, this also has embedded reporting and alert notifications in it so that your team, your organization is well informed of any activity that's being done, right? And in our GUI, it's as easy as seeing a slide like this. It will ask you which Prism Central you're failing over from and where to, and the recovery status, right? So we talk about 5 steps. If you want to experience how it's done in the Nutanix cluster, my ask is that you try out our Nutanix test drive, right? So to get to this site, just go to Google and type Nutanix test drive, and then you'll see there a link. That number one link will direct you to the Nutanix test drive site, and from there you're able to experience the different Nutanix solutions that's available in the market, right? Now, before we end, if I can ask everybody to please answer a quick survey, all right? So kindly scan this QR code, if you will, and then after, we'll make it worth your time. So after completing the survey, we'll actually send you a free white paper, all right? So I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Now, while you guys are doing it, allow me to summarize the steps that we talked about. So we basically talked about 4 steps and one pre-step, that's step 0. It's know why and the how. Know the why and the how of your business continuity strategy and the requirements. Number 2 is know your requirements in your organization. Of course, different organizations would require different policies, different compliance measures put in place in terms of their DER strategies. Once you know that, you can choose the solution that best fits your requirement. Again, in every level, whether it's local resiliency or geographical resiliency, Nutanix will be able to help you every step of the way. All right. And then step 3 is to implement that solution as simple as possible and as easily as possible. And then step 4 is so that because you've implemented that as easily and as simple as possible, you are now able to experience and do and consume that DR strategy, that DR setup as easily and as simple as well for you and or your organization. Leaving less time managing the infrastructure and then more time given back to the critical projects in your organization. All right. So I hope you guys answered that quick survey. It's a short survey composed of I think 4 questions. It will greatly help us moving forward, and we'd like to hear from you as well. If you guys would like to know more details about what we've just presented, please feel free to reach out to your VSTECS representative, or I can also flash my email on the next slide. It has been a pleasure sharing to you guys the business continuity and disaster recovery solutions of Nutanix this afternoon. Thank you again to VSTECS for hosting this, and I hope our attendees, our guests this afternoon were able to get something out of this session.